This is We Burlesque.
It's just a jump to the left. With your hands on your hips.
This is We Burlesque, the podcast, and this is Passion Project. I'm your host, Viktor Devonne, and I get to talk to individuals who have passions that are very similar to mine, but they were able to manifest them in ways that I can only dream of because I don't know. I just can't get it on the page. And here is someone who absolutely got it on the page. I'm very excited to talk to the writer of FRANTASTIC, the Fran Fullenwider story. This is Marcus Heslop. Hello, hello.
Hello, nice to be here, Victor.
A pleasure. So before we get into some of the specifics about your our icon that we're going to be discussing here, what's a little bit about your backstory? Is this your first novel? Are you in academia? What is your interest
I teach drama in a secondary school, so that's my full-time post. Only about 4 years ago, I started writing. I've always been interested in people who are obscure or forgotten or on the margins of, society. I could never write a book about Tom Cruise, for example. I mean, I've got nothing against Tom Cruise. He's a perfectly adequate actor. But it doesn't interest me. So I like people who are obscure, forgotten, unknown. So I wrote a book a couple of years ago about a guy who was even more obscure than Fran Fullenwider, called Guy Standeven, who was a professional actor, but he was unusual because he happily did extra work, which is really unusual for someone who was a professional actor. And he appeared in hundreds of films. That was a really obscure book. And then I just started writing about. I started writing articles for magazines like Best of British and the Dark Side magazine, which is a horror magazine, but always focusing on maybe a forgotten person or a forgotten film.
your interest in these characters, I find not only admirable but very useful because again, we don't necessarily need another autobiography on someone like Tom Cruise, or something like that, unless they're going to take it from a very specific standpoint, which seems to be popular in a certain way. The idea of a lot of documentaries are coming from a very specific slant. A lot of podcasts are coming from a specific slant because there's the story, the story that goes out there in the press that is managed by the important people and edited by the important people, and then there's the truth. And as someone who is a big fan of character actors, even character actors who have name recognition, someone like Elsa Lanchester or Mary Wicks, we know who they are. The general populace might need to be told, oh, she was the Bride of Frankenstein, oh, she was in Sister Act, things like that. But these contextual clues will get you there. You go even further, and I appreciate that because these are people who worked and don't have that sort of studio protection that created a narrative that we're now learning. Some of our bigger stars like Anthony Perkins, and I mean Marilyn Monroe is one of the most famous examples, who were micromanaged to such extremes. So there's a little bit more freedom for you. But then again, you become the definitive resource.
Yeah, of course. And that's totally true. And if I didn't write this book about Fran Fullenwider, who would? Would it be something that was never written about, and then would she be forgotten to history? I think Rocky Horror, I didn't want Fran Fullenwider just to be a footnote to the Rocky Horror Picture Show. And don't get me wrong, like everybody else, it's a great film and I absolutely love it. And that's where I first discovered her as well. But otherwise, what would she be? She'd just be one of the Transylvanians. When she did so much more. She had a great writing career. She had a success in Italy, where her size, which I'm sure we'll get onto, wasn't even referenced in the movies. Everything else she did in the UK, she's literally on the credits as Fat Lady or Buxom Beauty in the Monster Club, for example. And it wasn't until she did these Italian films that began to change for her, and she began to be recognized as the gifted comic actress that she was.
I think for a lot of individuals, we assumed that she, particularly not only just because of her name, but we assumed that she must have been European or she must have been, um, I mean, German is the natural inclination with a name like
Mhm.
Fullenwider. But you indicated in your notes to me that she was actually born in Texas.
Yeah, she was born in Harlingen, Texas in 1945. Her father was a Navy. No, he wasn't in the Navy. He was in the Air Force.
Mm.
Her mom was a school. Her mother was a school teacher. The surname, I think she said once, had Dutch origins, and it was a real name. That's the thing that surprises a lot of people. One of our best quotes is that about her surname, she grew into it. That's what she said about her actual surname. But yeah, she was from Texas, lived there till 1955, and then started having an education all around Europe before she settled in London.
So my first awareness of her is obviously Rocky Horror. There are many people, it will be, and one of the great elements of the Transylvanians is that they are all distinctive. You can pick a favorite, you can pick one to
Mhm.
emulate, and certainly with shadow casts, that was a big component of it.
Mhm.
Was Rocky Horror something that you saw and then said, I want to know more about her specifically, or what is your background with the film Rocky Horror?
Well, like a lot of people, I watched it on video in the 1980s. I used to go to a drama club in Wickham, where I grew up, and someone said, let's watch this film." And like a lot of people, I just thought it was great and original, and there was nothing like it. I mean, for a film that's 50-year-old, it really is a unique movie. There's nothing else like it. Shock treatment doesn't come anywhere close, although I'm a bit of a fan. And I remember thinking this is great. And then years later, when I started watching films and thinking about these people who are just not necessarily extras, but not the main players. She does stand out for a number of reasons, obviously. But
Mhm.
I just originally it was going to be a magazine article for a magazine called Best of British, but the angle was that there wasn't enough about the UK. And by that time, started doing research about her. I thought there's a lot to this lady other than just the fact that she was in the Rocky Horror Picture Show. And what I like what you're saying about the Rocky Horror. If you look at the Transylvanians, old, young, black, white, tall, thin, every demographics catered for there.
Mhm.
And I think that's the enduring appeal with the Transylvanians. And I think that's why people tap into them. It's a rare in a film where these characters are gone after 40 minutes, but people are still dressing as those characters. I know Leandra Lynn from the Rocky Horror Minute podcast. I think she's dressed as Fran Fullenwider at a convention. I mean, that's pretty rare for effectively the supporting artists of the film. There's something enduring about them.
Well, a lot of what I established, so my history with Rocky Horror begins more than 20 years ago. So I'm 42, but I went to Rocky Horror in my senior year of high school, junior technically was when I started. But I knew the film. I first saw it in the 90s, but my first real awareness of it, I didn't understand that it was this massive universe.
Mhm.
But it sort of predates a lot of what is now conventional cosplay and people
Mhm.
dressing up as figures. And now you see people dressing up as ensemble or one-shot characters or characters where we only get little bits. And part of the fun, and I have friends who began costume construction before home video releases. Like you had to go to the theater and
Mhm.
take notes in your head or physically to
Yeah.
make sure you got all the things.
Mhm.
Um, so let's talk about Fran. So um she was born in Texas, and was she distinctive in her size then?
She was always a larger
Hmm.
person, even as a childhood. If you look at some of her childhood photos, I think some of them are going to be in the book. She was
Hmm.
always a little bigger. What comes across straight away is how massively popular she was, because in Texas, she was from a very wealthy family. every little thing that the family did was reported in the press. I say in the book, it reads like a Facebook of the 40s, because every little party they go to, every time she attended a birthday party, even when she was like 5, 6 years old, it mentions that Fran Fullenwider was invited. There's also early mentions of performances she appeared in school, and swimming galas and all that kind of thing. So she was, despite the fact that she would have been a bigger girl, for want of a better word, she was very, very popular and very confident, I think, from a very early age. Whether that was to mask any insecurities, or she was just, I mean, there's not always tears of a clown, is there? I think she was happy within herself. There was moments, she was who she was, and I think because she had a great personality, which comes across from everyone I spoke to who knew her, that's what held her in good stead throughout her life, really.
She's so just for our audience's benefit, we don't shy away from the word fat here. So if we use this word sort of cavalierly, I don't know how Fran self-described, but we don't necessarily view fat as a bad word. I think if you say anything with a certain sneer in your voice, anything can be a bad word. But as a larger body person myself, to a certain degree, I also have come to terms with the word fat. She wasn't dealing with a lot of the cultural and decade-specific moratorium on the word fat or on larger bodies specifically. So she didn't necessarily have that baggage, so to speak, that would be impressed upon later generations. And it's distinctly possible that if she had some influence or her family had some affluence in her area, it's not a big deal. Also, there was a time in the Renaissance where fat was how you knew that somebody was somebody.
Yeah, exactly. I think it became an issue when she got to the UK. She joined. So after she'd been through various, education institutes, a convent school in France, a little stint at NYU. I think when she got to the UK, because people were making a deal about her size, when she joined the Ugly Agency, which was an agency which still exists to this day, where the cast people who are unconventional looking, if you like. She joined that agency, and she did get a lot of press, and she played the press brilliantly. She joked about her size all the time. She used the word fat. She got in there before anybody else did. So she used that publicity, and she used that platform to spread, the cry of big is beautiful and be a plus size pioneer. I do think she thought herself like that from very early on, and she got in there with the jokes before anybody else could. She always comes across brilliant in interviews because she's always got the upper hand. There are moments of poignancy. I think when she wrote for Yes Magazine, which was a magazine she wrote for, she's a bit more vulnerable because it was her actual piece within this magazine for plus size people. But overall, I think she embraced it.
Now, she was obviously of size in the film Rocky Horror Picture Show, but that is not the largest she had been. Like there are some photography of her, scanned photography, but some photography of her in these luscious poses, just reveling. You practically can see the grapes being fed to her. And there's this softness and this sweetness, but also a sensuality about her.
Without a doubt. Yeah.
In terms of her, what she was being booked for, in terms of the Ugly agency, and Ugly, they worked with everybody. They worked with people of different disabilities. They worked with people of different heights and weights and distinctions, certainly. Is our contemporary view of something like the Ugly agency, which I believe still exists?
Yes, it does. Yeah, it does.
Is that, do you find an element of removing potential exploitation, taking the freak show out of it by saying, I'm representing myself, pay me for it if you want this?
Yeah, without a doubt. I don't think Ugly were or now were exploitative people. They just took people who didn't fit the normal, equity book for extra work, for example. The chap who plays the Katina patron in Star Wars: A New Hope. He was on the Ugly Agency. Stephen Calcutt was in the another Rocky Horror Transylvanian. He was in there. I don't know. I think they got them work where they wouldn't get through Central Casting, which was the other agency that predominantly provided extras, etc. A lot of them had very successful careers as a result.
Hmm. Did you find that the Ugly Agency was a resource for you when you were writing this?
Not really. She wasn't with Ugly that long, and she was also with more than one agency throughout her career. I think by 1979, after the Italy success, she'd left Ugly and she had a different agency. Susan James was that agent then. So I think Ugly probably got her some of the earlier work. I think she joined in 1972.
Hmm.
Rocky Horror was 75. Then she did 3 films in Italy. And by the time she came back from Italy, she'd left Ugly. I think she was bigger than Ugly by then, to be quite honest, because if they were providing predominantly faces, character faces, occasionally people with lines and dialogue, etc., I think she was a bit big for that. And then
It's bigger than Ugly. That's a great soundbite.
yeah, bigger than Ugly.
Did she get her role in Rocky Horror through Ugly?
I think Andrew Logan, I don't know if you know about Andrew Logan, but he ran the alternative Miss World pageant where anyone could enter, and this was in the early 70s. Anyone could enter, male or female, and it was an alternative to the cheesy pageants, Miss World competitions. Fran entered that as Miss. She was called Miss Southern Comfort. That was her name on that, and I think Richard O'Brien saw her at the alternative Miss World pageant because it was the year before Rocky Horror, and when Jim Shorman was picking the extras, well, not the extras, sorry, the actors to be Transylvanians, there was a little bit of cross-talking between not just looking at agency photos, but Richard O'Brien having Fran in mind from Cena in sashaying down this catwalk as Miss Southern Comfort. He remembered her. You wouldn't forget her.
There is some talk about Richard O'Brien doing a lot of the casting because obviously there were people of note in the film that we now consider some of them household names, but for a lot of them were either directly from the stage show of Rocky Horror Show, or were burgeoning Americans.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of the Transylvanians, do you know if there was like a like a audition process, or was it basically like, we want you, just say yes
I
situation?
think it was knowing some people, so I think it was who Richard O'Brien knew, who Jim Shorman knew, and I think for some of there's a big distinction between some of the Transylvanians. Some of them were predominantly extras. So Hugh Cecil, for example, the bald guy,
Hmm.
the old bald, he was predominantly an extra. Occasionally he had speaking work, but Christopher Biggins, for example, who in this country is very famous,
Successful,
um,
yeah.
very successful, famous actor. He was an established actor, for want of a better word. So there's a mix in there between Annabelle Leventon, for example, big stage actress here in the UK. But Hugh Cecil and Tony Cowan, Tony Cowan, they were predominantly extras and always did extra work. So, and I think there was a little bit of, if you read Scott Michael's brilliant book From Concept to Cult, there's quite a few references between there being a bit of the actors and the
Hmm.
extras between the Transylvanians. But I think they were cast on physicality more than anything. If you look at how, like we mentioned before, how the range of looks and heights with little Sadie Corey and huge Stephen Calcutt, it was all about, I think, creating this diverse
Well,
microcosm society.
I think it's also really fun because again, if we're meant to believe that these are aliens,
Mm-hmm.
I love it's such a change of pace to say that aliens look different because we as humans look different, but why do all of the aliens that visit us in sci-fi, they all look the same? It's such an interesting concept.
Yeah, it is, isn't it?
Um, but then again, there's also a theory that the Transylvanians are in fact not aliens. They're just fans of the
Mm-hmm.
aliens. And that they're not actually from transsexual.
It's open to interpretation,
Absolutely.
and that's what people love about it.
Yes, I mean that is it. I mean that is one of the great pleasures of Rocky Horror is that it because it's so open-ended and because there's clearly this there are people who consider it, not a good film, and there are people who consider it genius. I consider it genius for a lot of reasons, not the least of which is the work that is put into it, the set dressing, the styling, all of that is, and they did it what over 10 weeks, and
Hmm.
it's become lore at this point, and then you have the element of like the post production. Um, as a Transylvanian, Fran wouldn't have been contacted by anyone who was saying, let's do press for the film. Um, so was it more or less just a gig for her and then she moved on to the next thing?
Yeah, I think so. I think very much so. It was just a gig for her. And of course, what a lot of people forget, the film originally wasn't a huge hit, was it? It
Right.
was only on the repeated midnight screenings that made it I mean, it's the definition of a cult film, isn't it? It's the ultimate
Mm.
cult film. So I think, yeah, it would have been, and she did talk about it fondly in later life. It was just another job. And maybe from Rocky Horror, maybe that's where Fellini seen her, Federico Fellini, and wanted it and had an interview with her. Subsequently, for a film she was never in, but it did
Mm.
start this brief career that she had in Italy. So maybe Rocky Horror played some part in it, or maybe it was just coincidental that it was around the same time, 1975, that she did Rocky Horror and then made these films in Italy. But I think it was just another job, really.
Mm. Then you mentioned her work, potential work with Fellini. Is that why? Do you know why that didn't come to pass?
I think he called her to an interview for Casanova, and I think he ended up just casting somebody else. But because he knew other directors in Italy,
Hmm.
the story goes that that's how she got contacted to be in this series of Italian comedies, which are impossible to watch because they're not available. You can watch them online, but they're not
Ah,
subtitled. So I had to spend a lot of time speaking to Italian people and getting them to translate a lot of what Fran was saying, even though she's dubbed in the films anyway. It's not even her voice, although she could speak Italian. And it looks like everybody's dubbed in these films, and some of them are better than others and easier
hmm.
to follow. But what's interesting about the Italian comedies is that in most of them, well, she isn't. She isn't the butt of the joke. She's a lead and character, and the humor that does involve a physicality is about showcasing her natural comic abilities. The fact that she was a genuinely good actress and very good at comedy, and not she has a fat lady to laugh at. It was it
Right.
was it was more sophisticated than that. And I think the fuller figure was appreciated more in Italy, so it wasn't an issue.
Earthy, they would say, yes.
Yeah.
Someone who you mentioned one of her credits is buxom, yes.
Hmm.
Um, it is interesting that there is sort of this acceptance for different faces, different like eight people are allowed, I'll say allowed, are expected to age differently as
Hmm.
well when you're a British actor or you're accepted in the European audiences. There's not this American uh element where a lot of our actors are starting to look very much the same
Hmm.
uh through plastic surgery and through fillers and things like that. Um, so, as someone who was hired not only because she was distinctive, but because she was also talented and she could back it up, I believe I want to go back a little bit further. Film, I believe it is called Mutations.
Yeah, Mutations. Yeah, no,
Tell me about that a little bit.
so Mutations is a low budget horror film. It's set in a freak circus.
Hmm.
Donald Pleasance, unsurprisingly, he's the villain, and he's trying to make hybrids of humans and plants. It's a classic tale, and it's a controversial film because they use real people with physical deformities.
Hmm.
There's a guy in it who's billed as the pretzel boy because he has twisted limbs. There's a woman in it who clearly is just anorexic. So it's quite shocking because you're seeing people alongside Fran, who's just standing around in stockings and suspenders with very little to do.
Hmm.
Even billed as the fat lady, even though she was clearly called Dolly in the film quite a few times. Um, it's one of those films that is a very much a product of its time. There are moments of it which are quite unpleasant to watch because you're
Hmm.
all looking at somebody who's genuinely ill. In the case of the anorexic lady, so it's quite exploitative. But
Hmm.
it is a product of its time. It was made in 1972, I think. Yeah, 1972. And she's in it all the way through. She has very little to do apart from wheel on the pretzel boy in a wheelchair and just stand around. And in the end, of course, it's a bit like Freaks, the Todd Browning classic,
Yes.
in which, they all uprise against the cruel circus owner played by Tom Baker, future Doctor Who. The win in the end. But she didn't like it. She thought it was an unpleasant film. She said in an interview once, a ghastly film. I think that's how she referred it to us, and it is. I mean, there are some good bits in it, but it's not a classic. You wouldn't put it alongside the Hammer Horrors or anything like that. But it's
Or even
watchable.
Freaks. I mean, and Freaks has become, I believe it's even like Criterion. Like it's considered a monumental film that if Todd Browning didn't have Dracula, that would be the first film that people would talk about. Yeah. Yeah.
You call the mutations, really, it's a poor man's Freaks. That's how you describe it.
Yeah.
It doesn't have. Todd Browning was a genuinely good director, and I think Jack Cardiff directed Mutations, who's not a household name. I think he might have been a cinematographer. I'm not sure. So if that's wrong, you can snip that bit out.
Well, some of the we'll say charm of Freaks is also that it is people with these actual conditions and actually looking like they do. A lot of them are not professional actors, and so with someone like Fran, she was educated. Was she theatrically minded? Was she planning on becoming a serious tour?
Not initially. She went to when she worked in theatre in the 1960s, and then at RADA, she was going to do stage management. She said she wasn't very good at it, and she left a mop and bucket on the stage in the production of The Tempest. I don't know if that was true. An interesting thing about Fran, and I touch on it throughout the book, is that I call her a fantasist at one point, because there are stories, and I think she did it because she got bored with interviews talking about her weight. Some of her stories are so fantastical and over the top. They're brilliant to read. But no, originally she was going to start out in stage management. And then there's the story that she did write to the BBC, because I've got the letter she wrote to the BBC. And the BBC wrote back saying it was very difficult for people who weren't British to get work within the BBC, signed by a Hungarian producer, ironically. So that's when she applied for the Ugly agency. The story, and I don't know if it's true or not, is that she applied to
unreliable narrator. Yes.
Yeah. So, she applied to be a secretary at the Ugly agency, and she was too big to fit in the office, so they put her on the books instead. Whether that's true or not, I don't know, but it makes good copy. So
of course,
I don't know. Of course it does. But no, originally she had no intention of acting, really, because she was interested in working. She wanted to direct initially.
So when she started getting this work and she went through agency to agency, I don't really have a great sense of what that system must have been like for a non-celebrity, but we have sort of a view of the Hollywood circuit being either somewhat exploitative as well, or as I mentioned, sort of running people through the machine or creating this perfect being, particularly when it came to sexuality or when it came to marriages or children out of wedlock or what have you. Do you think that she would have been more embraced if she was scandalous? Scandalous?
Possibly. Yeah, maybe. And she wasn't. I mean, I suppose in a way, if you're looking at it, we're talking the early 70s in the UK. The fact that she was, let's use the word fat, that she was a big lady, and she was doing things like Penthouse magazine and being the first clothed, but you've probably seen the photo of her in the stockings and suspenders. That in itself, in 1970s Britain, is probably scandalous enough. Maybe if she'd had more scandal with her not being a famous actor, she might not have got work. So I think she got the balance right between, the amount of scandal she had just by being a bigger woman was probably scandalous enough, in the fact that she did Penthouse magazine and she talked so openly about all the lovers that she had. And a lot of these stories are quite fantastical. But again, I really do believe that I don't think she had a problem with the truth. I think when you're being interviewed and all people are talking about is your weight and how much you weigh, I think she just made stuff up. She made some of these stories up because they're amusing for a start. And what's, once you've established that, you have a issue with your weight, where do you go there with the rest of the story? So she gave really good interviews, because she just told these, wildly, often implausible stories, which are a hoot to read. Really amusing stories.